What is up, guys? We are back with another video, another review. So this time we got Neil Gaiman's The Ocean at the End of the Lane. So I mean, most people know Neil Gaiman. He's super famous. This is actually the first thing I've read by Neil Gaiman. I don't know how I've gone this long without reading anything by Neil Gaiman. But you know, I saw this book and I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot and see what I like about it or what I don't like about it. And this book is super interesting, guys. It's very short. It's 178 pages. And he said when he was starting this book, he was actually starting a short story. He thought it would just be a short story about an opal miner that visited a young boy. And it turns out he just kept going and he let his imagination take over. And it became a short novel. And this book is super interesting. It's about a young boy who, well, first off, in the prologue, it's a man that is returning back home to his hometown for a funeral. At some point during the funeral, he leaves by himself. He drives away, and he drives to his childhood home, which no longer exists because it got demolished. So then he decides to drive to the Hempstock's house, who were people he knew when he was 7 years old. And as he goes there, he starts thinking about when he first met them, when he was 7 years old. And then we go back in time, and like the whole story, except the prologue and epilogue, is when he's 7 years old. So it's an adult story. It's an adult fantasy, told through the point of view of a 7-year-old. But even though it's told through the point of view of a 7-year-old, there are still very dark elements and dark things that happens. Like there's sex, there's violence, and also something very mature is just this whole idea of existence. And it's hard to describe this book at times because it's very dreamlike, right? He has memories, and he'll sometimes be like, oh, well, I actually don't know if it looked like that. It kind of looked like something I can't describe in words. Like, he'll say things like that. And it creates this very dreamlike atmosphere. Sometimes it's quite uncomfortable in a dreamlike sense, like a nightmare almost. And so Neil Gaiman kind of just flexes his muscle to be able to do this so well. Like, you really feel like you're in a dream at parts. Sometimes the dream is great. Sometimes the dream is really creepy and unsettling. And yeah, so I really liked the book, but it was very frustrating at times because it seems like many times Neil Gaiman and the characters, they won't just say what they mean, which can be frustrating. Like, for example, instead of saying, oh, we're trying to go back in time to fix this thing that just happened, they'll instead say something like, oh, we're stitching a quilt or something. We have to stitch it just right. And it's like, he does things like that constantly, right? Where you're guessing, okay, what's really happening? What's really happening? What does that mean? What did she mean by that? There's this one quote where the boy said, and then Letty, who's the little girl of the other Hempstock family, Letty always spoke in mysteries like that. And it's like, yeah, like, can she ever just say what she means? And so that part got really frustrating for me sometimes because in some instances, I didn't mind it. In fact, I kind of liked that. And then in others, because it happens so often, others I'm just like, all right, come on, just freaking say what's going on. So it could definitely get annoying at parts, and that part will be a turnoff for some people that read this book. Some people will not like the book because of that. It's not really clear what's happening a lot of the time. Yeah, guys, so let's get into some quotes. So it's hard not to spoil anything because the book is so short for one, and also it's the details of things that happen are hard to explain. Um, so I picked some quotes that I think are okay and not spoilery. So here's the first one. It's him describing an infiltrator in his family. It's a new caretaker who he thinks is a monster. After dinner, we all watched Mission Impossible. I usually liked Mission Impossible, but this time it made me feel uneasy as people kept pulling their faces off to reveal new faces beneath. They were wearing rubber masks, and it was always our heroes underneath. But I wondered what would happen if Ursula Monkton pulled off her face. What would be underneath that? Ursula is the caretaker that he believes is a monster. And I'm not going to spoil everything, but, he's only 7 years old. So then you as the reader are thinking, like, is she really a monster or is this just in his imagination? You don't really know. Let's go to the next quote, guys. So here's an element of horror that's in this book. It gets super freaky at parts, right? So I'm not going to tell too much about the situation, but he has a bunch of bandages, like cloths, that are magically being attracted to him. And here we go. The first strip of gray cloth landed on the back of my left hand, and it stuck there. I reached out my right hand and grabbed it, and I pulled the cloth off. It adhered for a moment, and as it pulled off, it made a sucking sound. There was a discolored patch on the back of my left hand, where the cloth had been, and it was as red as if I had been sucking on it for a long, long time. Longer and harder than I ever had in real life, and it was beaded with blood. There were pinpricks of red wetness that smeared as I touched it, and then a long bandage cloth began to attach itself to my legs, and I moved away as a cloth landed on my face and my forehead, and another wrapped itself over my eyes, blinding me. So I pulled at the cloth on my eyes. But now another cloth circled my wrists, bound them together, and my arms were wrapped and bound to my body, and I stumbled and fell to the floor. Sure, there's moments like that where you're like, what the hell is going on? Where like he pulled the one bandage off and it just made blood all over his hand where it had been. So then it's wrapping all around the rest of his body. He's like, well, he can't pull that off. He'll literally just be a bloody pulp. And the boy's only 7, so you're like, dude, this is disturbing. But it's super eerie in a good way. Let's go to the last quote. Let me read this one. This is Ursula talking to Monster, or perhaps Monster. Why would you let them in? She had started to cry, and I felt uncomfortable. I did not know what to do when adults cried. It was something I had only seen twice before in my life. I had seen my grandparents cry when my aunt had died in hospital, and I had seen my mother cry. Adults should not weep, I knew. They did not have mothers who would comfort them. So that's just one instance of the main character, who, by the way, I believe is unnamed. I don't even remember his name. And if he is named, it's like once or twice in the whole book. Where he sees things through the eyes of a kid, of course. He's 7 years old. And Neil Gaiman does such an excellent job with the point of view of a child. And I think that's a really difficult thing to do. Exemplify the point of view of a kid. Because, it's so easy to go too cliche and be so childlike when it's really more subtle, the point of view of a kid, So he does a really great job of that, guys. Overall, I liked this book, but I did get frustrated a lot reading it because it seemed like so many times I had no idea what the hell was going on. And I will say, though, that this book definitely warrants a second read, and I will read this another time for sure. I feel if I read it again, it would make more sense, and it would be even more exciting and a better read the second time. And I will say, though, that the last 40 pages or so really pick it up, and they get so exciting, and really tug at your heart. Because even though you might have been confused earlier on and been frustrated, you realize that you do actually care about the main character, and you do actually care about the Hemstocks, the family. And so that element of the Hemstocks and then the point of view of the kid, that's the best part of the book to me. The book is very strange. For some people, that's going to be a great thing. For others, it'll be too strange for them. Overall, though, it's definitely interesting. And I will 100% read Neil Gaiman again. Let me know what Neil Gaiman book should I read if you're a fan of Neil Gaiman. I heard American Gods is good, so I might check that out. If you like Neil Gaiman or any of his books, in the comments, put what I should read next. Alright guys, so keep reading, stay safe out there in this crazy world. I'll smell y'all later. This is Joseph's Book Reviews.